Welcome to Live with the Author, Bridging Research to Practice. This is RRQ's new podcast and Skype interview segments. We have here with us our wonderful Reading Research Quarterly author, Ms. Camilla Magnusson. Welcome, Camilla.
Hi, thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and how this study came to be.
Well, I am a doctoral student in Norwegian Language Arts Didactics in the Department of Teacher Education and School Research at the University of Oslo in Norway. And I was a high school teacher for many years. And I often had to spend a lot of time teaching reading strategies to 16-year-old students. They often use some strategies, but their repertoire was typically quite small. And I think that made it harder for them to become more proficient readers and also independent readers. So I wanted to investigate to what extent teachers at the lower secondary level focused on reading comprehension strategies and what kinds of strategies they emphasize and also how they might provide this instruction. Because in my experience as a teacher, I often found it difficult to find the best way of integrating the strategies in everyday teaching. So I think it would be of interest for many teachers if we could find some examples of how strategies could be framed and phrased in a natural classroom setting. There is a lot of research that show that comprehension strategies are effective in improving reading, and there are many examples of intervention studies that show ways of implementing instruction about strategies, but there is less on how teachers actually frame such instruction in their own classroom teaching.
That's fascinating. So tell us a little bit about the key findings of your study.
Well, first we identified all the lessons that contained some kind of reading activities in our data, and then we looked at the extent of comprehension strategies instruction. So in analyzing across all the lessons, we found that about 50% contained strategies instruction on some level, but only 14% contained explicit instruction, where teachers provide instruction about how and when and why to use strategies. The rest kind of only mention strategies or prompt students to use them.
So were you surprised by that?
Well, I was a bit surprised because there has been a lot of focus on teacher training programs on reading comprehension and reading strategies. So I thought we would find more explicit instruction than we actually did. But we also saw that the explicit instruction tended to cluster among teachers. So those teachers that actually used it, they used it a lot.
Well, that's interesting. So based off of the findings of your study, what would you tell teachers?
I think there's a great potential to turning the strategies instruction into more explicit practices, which I think is important at the start of the lower secondary grades, especially in Norway, where in 8th grade is kind of a transition phase, where students start at a new school or get new teachers. So I think it's important to make sure the students know how and when to use comprehension strategies, and that's focusing more on students becoming independent readers.
Can you give us an example of that?
We saw that those teachers that provided such explicit instruction, they did it in different ways. So some had this more contextualized approach, meaning that the teacher connected explicit instruction on strategies directly to a text that they were reading in class. Like this one situation, a teacher provided explicit description of activating prior knowledge as a pre-reading strategy in connection to an expository text that they were reading.
Interesting. So the teacher basically said, all right, guys, if you think about this topic, this will help you understand the topic better.
Yes. And they focused on why they should use the strategy, that they should connect it to what they already know, to new knowledge, and also when this strategy could be used, and he highlighted the transferability to other reading subjects.
Oh, I like that. So it's the what, but also the when and the why.
Yes.
So it's not enough just to say the strategy, but to say why we use it and when it's helpful.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So based off of your study, what would you tell principals or policymakers?
I think I would tell principals and at schools that they could focus their teacher development work on comprehension instruction and discuss what part strategies instruction should have in their practices at the particular school. And perhaps discussing how the practices could be changed as we see the current. We also saw in the study that a lot of the reading comprehension instruction focused on text structure and discussions about text content. So perhaps they could discuss more about what part strategies instruction should have in their instructional practices at each school.
Yeah, and it also seems like even there, you have so many examples of when it was done well and explicitly saying the what, the when, and the how, versus times when it seems like it was just mentioned.
Yeah,
so giving teachers some concrete examples might be helpful there.
Yes. I would, to policymakers, I think that even though there have been teacher training programs specifically targeting reading instruction and also strategies, I think the findings here indicate that the focus on these issues should continue. So we know from prior research that implementing such instruction requires long-term commitment. So keeping a focus on this issue over time, I think, is important.
That is important. So longevity. So the teacher preparation colleges are tackling it, but giving some time to also get the professional development out there and to really build those repertoires of how to explicitly teach reading comprehension strategies.
Exactly. Yes.
And what would you tell parents based off of the findings of your research?
Well, I think that assisting adolescents in doing their homework or other reading activities, they could ask, like, how are you going to approach this text in order to understand it? Or how did you reason to find out that about that from the text? Or just helping them in monitoring the reading and making them aware of different ways of approaching texts. I don't mean that parents need to talk about particular strategies exactly, but we're trying to help their kids understand not only what they're reading, but also how they read.
So that seems like a really important key takeaway. Comprehension strategies is the how, right? So we use certain strategies to help us for certain reasons. So it's the what, the when, the where, and the why. And we as parents or teachers can help our students understand that.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So where do we go next with this research? What needs to be done?
Well, I think that it was, even though that we can see whether teachers do provide strategies instruction or not, I think it's also interesting to see if the students actually internalize the strategies and use them. So in the next study, I have followed one of the classrooms in this strategy study further in grade 9 and also grade 10, because this was done in grade 8. And this particular classroom, the teacher provided a lot of explicit strategies instruction, and also had the class also had very high gains on the national reading test from grade 8 to 9. So I want to continue to follow this classroom through the lower secondary grades to see what kind of instruction the teacher provided further, and I also interviewed the students at the end of grade 10 to see what they had to say about the instruction, the reading instruction that they had been through, and also what reflections they had about how to understand complex texts on their own. So would I find that they say they use the same strategies or approaches as I observed in the reading instruction? I think that could probably give some information of whether the students have internalized some of the strategies, or at least about their kind of metacognitive awareness of own reading processes.
Absolutely. I mean, it seems like 2 years later, if they're still talking about the same strategies, those definitely made a difference in their reading. Fascinating. Well, thank you so much for being with us. You've left me a lot to think about. I'm definitely thinking about how can I be more explicit in how I talk about comprehension strategies, because it doesn't sound like it's enough just to talk about them. I've got to talk about why I use them, how they're effective when I use them, with the goal that these actually help me build meaning.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.